Hello YouTube, how are you doing? Today I would like to kind of create a continuation of the previous episodes. Today I want to talk about familiars. The way in which I'm going to try to speak about familiars is a little bit strange because the term familiar as we know it today, back then for the Mesoamericans had many different types of terms. So I'm going to try to kind of translate the terms of what we now know as familiars to how the people, either the Maya or some modern Mazateca people have been describing their familiars. And anybody that has spent a long period of time by themselves, either people that are in jail, that are in confinement for long periods of time, or Moses or Jesus that spend 40 days and 40 nights up in the middle of the desert, they will tell you that they start having conversations or talks with somebody or something. Something starts to appear. As to whether that and those entities are real or not, that is a subject of debate. But the changes that have occurred from the people that hear these voices have been quite dramatic, not only for Maya people or for the woman that I'm going to talk about a lot today, Maria Sabina, to Moses and Jesus. The conversations that had with those particular either spirits or familiars have changed the world. Moses became one of the founders of Judaism, if not the foundational block for a lot of religion today. Jesus and his conversations with whatever spirits he spoke with also changed the world forever. Maria Sabina, in this instance, even though she was a small woman from a very remote area of Mexico where she probably didn't even know how to read and write, because at that time there were no schools in those areas, she changed pharmacology for the whole world. And so it's just incredible the things that happen when these people have these types of conversations. Anyway, thank you very much, and let's go. Okay, to try to understand the relationship of the people from Mesoamerica to their familiars, we have to understand a lot of their terms. Those people, and even to this day, a lot of those people that live in remote areas do not have the same concept of reality that we have. Our concepts of reality are very materialistic. We only assume things to be real if we can see them or if we can perceive them. The people from Mesoamerica did not believe that. They believed that there were multiple different space-time dimensions, I guess, shall we call it, in which things exist beyond the perceivable world. The perceivable world is, of course, ultimate reality, but there is also the reality of the gods, there is a reality of the dead, and there is a reality of kind of like the embedded spirits within the bodies. And so, having those terms kind of already stated, let's just start to try to understand a little bit on how the Native Americans saw familiars. One of the most famous characters of Aztec history, or Mexica history, or Triple Alliance history, is Netzahualcoyotl. Netzahualcoyotl was a prince that he grew up most of his life in this area of kind of close to Mexico City, called Schkoko. And in Schkoko, he was the heir to the kingdom of Schkoko. His father got into a feud with the king of the Tepanecas, and the Tepaneca ended up being victorious, and they killed the king, and therefore the prince Netzahualcoyotl had to flee. As he was fleeing, there are stories where he spent a lot of time by himself, going from place to place, not really knowing where he belonged in the world. And so he started to write poetry. And as he wrote poetry, he spoke a lot in his poetry about the king of the snakes. In one of his poems, he says that the king of the snakes was able to give him visions and dreams that he usually did not have before. Now, the character of Netzahualcoyotl, it's so important because he was not only an Aztec king, he revolutionized many things about Aztec life. He was a great poet, he was a great architect, he was a great engineer. He also developed a lot in art, in warfare. But one of his biggest accomplishments was the retention and leveling of the waters in Mexico, Tenochtitlan. In Mexico, back then there were no roads like we know them today. There were no asphalt roads. A lot of the way in which things move, they move through chalupas and waterways. A lot of the waterways were sectioned off artificially with chinampas. Chinampas are these kind of like platforms that the Mexica built, and also other tribes built to place their homes in the middle of the lake or to plant in the middle of the lake. Now, this had to be done out of necessity because in that area there was a lot of lakes, and land and hunting permits were prohibited to the Aztecs when they initially arrived into Mexico City. Now, Netzahualcoyotl was the first person to come up with the idea of creating little dams that could regulate the flow of water. The reason why there was so much problem with the flow of water was because if the chinampas had too much water, the crops for that particular year or season were gone. And so this created famine, this created a lot of disease, and sectioning off the lake of Schkoko was a great way for people not to die. And so the Aztecs and the Mexica were extremely grateful for Netzahualcoyotl to be able to come up with that solution. A lot of this has been attributed to the King of the Snakes. This is folk legends. Now, to try to understand the concept of the familiars is very difficult to try to understand it from an archaeological perspective, because we have very little record of the Aztecs or the Maya or anybody else. But fortunately, we have some remains of those particular traditions. The person that I want to speak about is Maria Sabina. Maria Sabina, she was born in a very remote area of Oaxaca in the late 1800s. And she was a regular girl, of Oaxaca. And in that area, like I said, there was very little education. Most of these women have to dedicate their lives to their family, and there's little outside the scope of family and their community. They don't travel, they don't do a lot of things, and even up to this day, a lot of those women don't. But Maria Sabina had a tradition gifted through her parents of the mushrooms. Maria Sabina said that her parents spoke of the mushrooms not as mushrooms, but as kind of like holy saints or holy children. And in fact, Maria Sabina spoke of the mushrooms as holy children. She did not speak of mushrooms as mushrooms. For example, Carlos Castaneda, he speaks of the peyote as peyote, and he even says that Don Juan spoke of peyote as peyote, but he actually said mezcalito. Mezcalito is a kind of a diminutive type of word that basically means little mezcal, which is also very similar to Maria Sabina's way of saying the holy children. It's kind of like these tiny little kids. Which is kind of interesting because you also kind of see that in John Dee when she starts speaking about Madimi, which is one of the first spirits that him and Edward Kelly contact. And Madimi is also this little girl that causes a lot of chaos. And the reason why Maria Sabina also talks about the holy children as the mushrooms is because they also cause a lot of chaos. but they also provide a lot of information. Now, Maria Sabina used to provide the service of veladas. Veladas were a certain type of ceremony in which Maria Sabina was able to enter into a trance, and as a result was able to heal people of certain maladies. Some people will claim that they were healed from cancer, from severe depression, from ideas of schizophrenia, and there were even bodily certain type of diseases. Maria Sabina was able to heal a lot of that. Now, Maria Sabina became a little famous, fortunately and unfortunately, because she was really good. She was really good at manipulating the magic of the mushrooms. Once again, this is also a type of ingestible, hallucinogenic type of magic. It wasn't like a wishy-washy type of magic where you invoke spirits and you wish something to happen. No, it was Maria Sabina gave mushrooms to the attendants of the velada, of the ceremony, and they produce effects that produce a certain type of healing mechanism. And so the veladas were attended by people like John Lennon, were attended by people by Timothy Leary, who later on went on to say that he found the Rosetta Stone of consciousness, and instead of to try to change the world and manipulate people and tell them what to do. Walt Disney also went to visit Maria Sabina, and after his visit he had a different vision of what Disney became today. A lot of the physicians that influenced the world of LSD went to visit Maria Sabina, and in fact the 60s would have the LDS 60s culture would have not become what it became if it had not been for Maria Sabina. Now, Maria Sabina was a devout Catholic, but as we read her chants, thanks to Alvaro Estrada, we can see a lot of Maya traditional influence, or at least what we can read in the estelas of the Maya murals and the codices. She speaks about the hurricane god. He talks about the earth, talks about the mountains, it talks about the trees. And for the velada even to begin, Maria Sabina had to be celibate for 2 to 3 weeks, not think about sex. She said that without that, the ceremony would have not been effective. Then the attendants and herself had to clean themselves as best as they could. She filled the whole room where they conducted the ceremony, the velada, with incense, because the tradition was that the stench of the bodies offends the spirits. As to whether the spirits exist or not, it is a subject for debate. But the fact is that they try to minimize human odor as much as possible, and also human carnal type of ideation. Once everybody was ready, she began to chant and to pray, and once she got to a certain point, she started handing out mushrooms to the attendants, and these started to create a type of trance for every attendant in the room. And for healing physical maladies, she used to rub tobacco mixed with either alcohol or other hallucinogenic plants onto the person that was sick or had the malady, and it was extremely effective. Now, the tradition of how to summon familiars, either with hallucinogenics or with long extended periods of isolation, was certainly not invented by Maria Sabina. There was a Jewish converso, Fray, that spoke, this is Fray Pane. He speaks of the natives as having semies. The semies were a type of idol that the natives used to have in their homes. They either build them out of stone or they build them out of wood, and they were able to invoke this particular familiar, semia, to have a particular property. These types of properties were either a type of blessing, or to ask for a particular favor, or to ask for a particular vision or insight, to be able to try to understand the universe. Now, this is a little contradictory, because how can you try to have a vision of the present world by trying to reach into the world of the supernatural? The astral vision of the Mesoamericans lived in the realm of space and time. There were many different types of space and time. There was a space and time for us, the one that we experience today, but there was also space and time for either the dead relatives or for the gods, and therefore they believed that they were that through a certain type of familiar, they will be able to tap into this space-time type of relationship. Now, as to whether a familiar is real or not is a subject for debate, and we will never know the answer to this. But the real changes that happen in this real world from the people that had those relationships with familiars cannot be estimated in any form. Netzahualcoyotl or Maria Sabina were not the only ones to have familiars who changed their world forever, and also influenced the world of the people around them forever. Another person that had a familiar in this present age is Ramanujan, the Indian mathematician. He made all of this possible. Eigenvectors, microwaves, the mathematics that he developed made a lot of this world possible. And even in economics, his mathematics was off the charts, and nobody else, even in the greatest universities like Cambridge or Harvard, were able to match him. And he blamed a lot of those mathematical concepts to an Indian goddess, a patron Indian goddess of his. Now, you can also perceive that also as a familiar. These types of magical or psychological effects that people have from speaking to these particular entities, it is just amazing. Unfortunately now, most of us detach ourselves from ourselves and decide to get influenced by either television or video games or whatever it is that our vices takes us. And so we decide to make those our familiars, as opposed to look within ourselves as familiars. And also the world of hallucinogenics is abused and feared. People today just get high for the sake of getting high, as opposed to try to tap into the spiritual aspect of that particular plant. I blame also a little bit Carlos Castaneda and also the cartels and of just trying to pump drugs into people to create some type of profit, as opposed to try to understand the world for what the world is. Anyway, hopefully this is not a downer episode. Thank you very much for listening to what I have to say. I will post the references at the bottom, and thank you very much and have a great one. Bye bye.